Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back, gang. We are approaching April already. Is it me, or is the Earth spinning faster on its axis and time just going so much quicker these days? Or am I just getting old? Well, I last spoke to today's guest over a year ago. His name is Mark Curtis, and he is the head of innovation at Accenture. And the last time we spoke, we talked about creativity and how organisations can overcome the growing digital disconnect. But today, we're going to be talking about how brands could fare in the Metaverse and how it is expanding beyond just the gaming community, with designers, digital product developers, creatives and technologists all playing a key role in virtual world building and content placement, as well as lots of other exciting things. But I know many of you may think it's overhyped at the moment, but I want you all to take a long-term view with me and Mark today and look in the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 and beyond years of how everything is changing. And it feels like we're on the cusp of something quite special at the moment. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the UK. So wherever you're listening in the world, you can join me and Mark Curtis from Accenture in conversation today about all things Metaverse. And we may even take a peek into our virtual crystal ball too. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Mark. Can you remind the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Mark Curtis. I lead innovation and thought leadership at Accenture Interactive, which is the part of Accenture which focuses on brand, experience, everything that happens when, from before you become aware of a brand through to your interaction with it, and how you consume its products and services through to customer care and beyond. So its experience is probably the wrapper for all of that.
And one of the things that we do on the show now, before I talk about your success and all the things that you're working on, I always like to ask my guests, how did you get here? What's your origin story? Where did your passion for tech come from? What lit the spark and ultimately put you on this path you're on right now?
So back in the 90s, I began to see how you could use technology to engage with people. And actually, bizarrely, it all started with some things called target tuners, which were tiny fixed frequency radios on the FM waveband that we bought in bulk from America, and then we're using with radio stations and Pepsi. And I saw that the sort of combination of brand and technology and media was really very powerful and very interesting. And then literally I read The Economist one week, and they were talking about what they call convergence, which was this, at the time, new thing about telephony, as they quaintly called it, television and computing all coming together in the same spot. And of course, that became the internet, and then that became the web. And I just became obsessed with it overnight. I could see that this was going to change everything about marketing. And then after I set up my first agency together with a colleague in London to pursue that as an idea, I think as we began to develop those early interactive things that we did, and then we began to develop websites, because it wasn't actually initially websites we did, I began to see that it wasn't just about changing marketing. It was actually going to change everything that businesses do. And that became crystal clear in the kind of 96, 97. I didn't look back from them.
Wow, what a great story. And I think it's been just under a year since we last spoke. And one of the reasons I invited you back on the podcast today was to explore how brands could fare in the Metaverse. There's so much hype around it at the moment. And some people listening might think it's guilty of being overhyped. But what excites you about the possibilities and opportunities around the Metaverse? Is there anything that is particularly exciting you right now?
Well, there's lots.
Yeah.
I think it's the potential of the big picture of the Metaverse, which I think is exciting.
Yeah.
And although not everybody would quite agree with what I'm about to say, I think the comfortable way to think of the Metaverse is that it's a guess right now. It's a guess that a number of technologies and actually other trends, more social trends, you could say, are coming together in the same time and place right now and over the next 5 to 10 years. Because let's be clear, this is a long-term play. This is going to take some time to play out. Those things are coming together in a format which is going to be compelling and different. And what I find exciting about it is that we are in effect putting back into digital two things which are very human or very human ideas, which we took out when digital started. And those two things in particular are place and property. And what's exciting about that is we typically don't think we're going somewhere when we go to a website or an app. In fact, I just used, as you heard, I used the verb go to, but it's not actually the mental model. You don't think you're traveling to a separate place. It's something you're looking at on the screen. But with the metaverse, place becomes super important. And that place will have an architectural or spatial logic and consistency all of its own, and will be linked to other spaces which are similar. You might contend, well, hang on, what about augmented reality? You're not just talking about VR here. Well, even with augmented reality, there is this place is critical because it is the place you are now, which has its own consistent logic, with something digital overlaid over the top of it. So some people are talking, and I quite like this, about the Internet of Place.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful. The other thing, and of course, so place has been largely missing from our conception of what we do with digital. The other thing that has been largely missing is the sense that you can have product or property. I tend to be in two minds about which to call it. So owning product in digital, I mean, you don't look at a website or an app and think, well, I own something here. Actually, strangely, you did for a while because you could actually buy movies, and of course you still can on Amazon. But generally, we stream from Spotify, for example. We don't own things in digital. But what's different about the metaverse is the potential to own things and then to be able to carry them around with you. So, of course, portability is not actually with us yet. So that's somewhere where people might well say, oh, hang on, that's all overhyped. And portability is a big nut to crack in order to make the metaverse as fluid and as open as I think many of us would like to see it become. But nonetheless, as an operating principle, the idea that you can now property which you own, largely because of crypto and particularly NFTs, is extremely exciting and interesting. And those two things together, that place and property thing, seem to me to represent potentially a terrific acceleration and shift in what we do with digital and how we think about it.
And I think one of the most important things you said there is it is a long-term plan. Here in 2022, there'll be many people listening that struggle to see beyond the world of gaming communities, but there will be new job roles emerge to help personalize and build these virtual worlds. And we're going to need graphic designers to build the house, decorate the house. We've got fashion, and there's so much going on there. But can you expand on what that will look like beyond just the gaming community in the future?
Yeah, and I think this is the point at which I have to say, look, we need to be very careful about overly identifying this as being all about just consumer products.
Yeah.
Our belief is the enterprise aspects of the metaverse are huge, and that we can expect to see lots of impact of the metaverse in the ways in which companies actually work and the way in which they create products and services and take them out to market. So the potential there is, if you like, on a spectrum between interesting, exciting things that you might do as a consumer through to shifts in the way in which you will do your work. I think that's very important to think about. But again, I think it's important to stress it's going to take some time for this to evolve. I think what's going to happen over the next couple of years is we're going to see, and there's a terrific focus on NFTs right now, understandably, because it's doable now. But I think we're going to see an evolution over the next couple of years where companies initially what will happen is lots of brands are going to make the mistake of doing stuff in the metaverse, which is either very self-referential. What I mean by that is they're just really talking about themselves. I've heard people talk about, oh, great, we can put our app in the metaverse. And you have to think, well, hang on a moment. Surely the affordances of this new place that we're developing, or series of places, mean that we should be thinking in a much more revolutionary manner about not trying to replicate something we're already doing. Let me try and unpack both of those.
Yeah.
So on the self-referential bit, there are brands who have already gone to market and said, here effectively is an NFT of famous logos or famous manifestations of our logo from the past. I'm not going to name names, but there's one brand in particular I'm thinking of that's done this. But the problem is, in the end, and brands tend to think of themselves as being super important, but the role they play in people's lives in most cases is pretty marginal. People are not obsessed with brands as much as the brand owner is obsessed with the brands. Mm. And so we always make this mistake, and we did it with the internet in the first place. And I was there, and I would help brands make the mistake of putting up, what we did is we put up websites which were all about the brand. And you'll probably get a few visits because people are interested in the novelty factor, but they won't come back. And they won't come back because there's no reason for them to do so. There's no purpose. So we have to sort of skip over that stage as fast as possible and begin to think, what can we do with the metaverse that is useful? Talking to retail, the obvious thing is, well, can we put our shop in the metaverse and replicate it and people can walk around and buy things? So that might be a good idea, and I'm absolutely not writing that off. But wouldn't it be even more interesting to use the metaverse to put that shop in your house so that you can walk around your kitchen, for example, and touch things and they get ordered for you immediately? And how about if we expanded that thinking and said, the things that you're looking in your house, other companies can bid for replacing that thing. So you could almost create a kind of Google ad engine for, we're going to appear and do stuff for you, which we will solve problems for you, et cetera, et cetera. That seems to me to be a more imaginative way of thinking about the metaverse than just, we're going to bank branch or we're going to build a supermarket and expect people to come to it. So that, I think, is a phase we're going to be going through over the next 2 to 5 years. And of course, that's going to be complicated by the fact that a lot of the technologies are still relatively immature, very immature, and how they come together. I mentioned already portability is an issue. How they come together is as yet by no means clear.
And it almost feels reminiscent of when the mobile app store first opened back in, I think it was 2008. To begin with, it was useless apps, just developers playing, where I think it was the guy that turn your iPhone into a pint of beer. And then all of a sudden, every business hopped on board. And yes, we must have an app, but that app is going to do exactly the same as the website. And it's not till several years later, as everything matures, that we started to solve real problems and look at how you could serve the audiences better. It's very similar, isn't it, in a way?
It is. Thank you. I can't thank you enough, actually, for reminding me of the beer app. That is of course, everybody saw it. So It didn't fail. It just wasn't anything anybody was going to look at more than once or twice. And so I think that it's a very good example of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that guy earned something like $20,000 a day at the time. So he did okay out of it.
Yeah.
But if we look into the future, I'm curious, do you see the democratization of access? Do you think that might lead to a new wealth of shared cultural experiences and the emergence of new economies as well? Or am I being too idealistic there?
I think it's fine to be idealistic at this stage. And I think it's good to be idealistic at this stage, because I think we need to have a vision of why this is a positive place. I actually think that's essential, because we've written in Fewer Trends in the past about digital overload, and I don't think that's gone away. In fact, lockdowns and the pandemic have probably made it worse, because so many of us are spending so much of our time staring at screens in order just to get things done. So I think we need a very positive view of what the metaverse is about, and because there are already, and of course, quite rightly so, there are cynics who are maybe misinterpreting it and saying, I don't want to spend my whole life inside an Oculus headset. Yeah. And nobody really is suggesting that anybody should, but there will be cynics. And I think to counter the cynics, and also just for the health of all of us, we need to have a positive view of what can be created here. I think, again, it's worth tracking back, almost 30 years now, to when the web began to break cover. And back in 95, 96, I would really put it at. And there was a lot of what has been called techno-utopianism around at that time. And of course, what we've subsequently discovered is that it isn't necessarily that easy. I don't think many people at the time forecast that the result of this would be the result of everything that we were doing would be a few companies who would be massively dominant across the whole digital space. And yet that's where we've landed. So there was a lot of talk back then about a new open system, but it turns out that the system, is now dominated by a few companies. It turns out that in the case of some countries in the world, the system can actually be closed off and controlled. And there was a lot of hope that would never be the case again, but it turns out it is the case. So I am absolutely not skeptical of the democratization of access. I think a fine and powerful thing that we should be pushing for. And I do believe that what is happening with decentralized organized DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and with the ability for creators to create things, which is coming out of gaming and breaking into the mainstream. I think all of these are very powerful and do represent a disruption. And we should be doing our best to enable a creative and empowering space. And I think it's good. We definitely need to have that vision. But we also need to bear in mind that in the past, we've had similar utopian dreams, and it's not quite how it's played out.
And again, if we look back a decade ago, every business was saying, we need an app, and meetings all over the place, third parties coming in to try and bring that to life. So I think we're going to go there again. And as brands seek to capitalise on the opportunities presented by the metaverse, what do you think they need to be mindful of before they rush into things?
Well, actually, that's the flip side of what I was just talking about. Yeah. So I think we both need a hopeful, optimistic vision.
Yeah.
But we also need to have a reality check. So I talked a moment ago about the internet has become dominated by a few large companies, the tech giants. And of course, to be fair, with a vast array of new businesses underneath that have been enabled, from Shopify down to My Local Grocer and Cheesemaker. It's definitely enabled a lot, but it has also created a concentration of power. I think that so when it comes to what businesses need to be aware of, we also need to look at the fact that the other thing that has happened with the internet is that all human behavior is on display and there for everyone to see. And that's sometimes great and ennobling. And it's sometimes pretty depressing, especially when you look at what goes on social media in some cases, especially when you look at, porn and particularly the wilder fringes of that. And especially, of course, child abuse and all of that kind of dark stuff. Unfortunately, there are always going to be bad people in the world, and they are always going to pick up the tools that are available to them and use them in ways which the majority don't like and which are socially, malevolent. So we need to build in responsibility to the metaverse right from the get-go. And at Accenture, that's something which is incredibly important to us. We are placing a very heavy emphasis on it. It's not just the sort of bad actors. It's other stuff as well. Like, I think I mentioned it again a moment ago, the way in which people are becoming weary of spending too much time staring at screens. We need to be mindful of people's mental health as well. We also need to be mindful of issues like diversity. Is the metaverse being built just by a bunch of enthusiastic men?
Yeah.
Or are we actually embracing a broader set of the population to build the metaverse? It's typically men who talk about it. They're absolutely not, that's not universal. And then you've got sustainability. At the moment, some NFTs burn single-handedly as much power, as much carbon or release as much carbon as you would if you were driving 500 miles across the US in the average car. So there's a whole range of things where we need to take, and there's not even beginning to mention security and security of data. Mm-hmm. There's a whole range of things where we need to think about this hard at the beginning. I've used in the past a metaphor, but it works for me, an analogy, which is that back in 1900, when the second or third person went through the windscreen of a car when it had to brake hard, somebody must have thought of a seatbelt. I mean, it's a pretty obvious sign. So why did it take 80 years before they began to become mandatory? So we don't have 80 years to play with this powerful new set of technologies. We need to do it now, and we need to think about what we've christened in the past the unintended consequences. We need to think about that right now as we're building it.
Such a great point about seatbelts there. And we're already seeing examples of the metaverse, how it could be used in the workplace. We've got apps such as Mesh for Microsoft Teams and Meet in VR, and there's more and more appearing all the time. But are there any early examples of how this space will evolve that you've seen that you think will evolve in the next few years?
I think we're very excited about the opportunity for digital twins. So digital twins is not new. But the metaverse, if you like, is the place where they will increasingly be embodied, and the range of technology and the range of technologies we're using in the metaverse, I think, are going to make digital twins a lot more powerful. So we've typically thought of digital twins until now as being things that will basically as being replicas of machines. Mm-hmm. So the best example, or a famous one often quoted, is an aircraft engine. So airlines are able to have digital twins of aircraft engines, or even indeed the manufacturer of the aircraft, who is then able to report back to the airline on how it's progressing, what maintenance is required, any safety issues they need to know about, etc., etc. I think what we will see in the metaverse, because of the mental model and the space that it creates, is an acceleration of this whole idea that we can have twins of things. So building digital twins of our houses, for example, so that we can monitor the flow of products, goods and services in and out of our house. So that when we talk to, for example, a tech supplier, they can see how our network is set up and make recommendations for it. So that when we come to sell our house, there is a digital twin secure record secured by blockchain of the house's history. That, I think, is definitely going to happen. That's very powerful and gives lots of commercial opportunities. And you actually begin to speculate, well, who might own that? Would it be, well, obviously the owner of the house should own it, or indeed in some ways you could argue the house itself owns it and it gets passed from owner to owner. But is it supplied by a bank? Is it supplied by a telco? Is it supplied by your power company? I think that's up for grabs. The big thing here is that mental model is so easy for people to understand. I mean, I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about, and I don't think it would take me, even with somebody who's never heard of the metaverse, it wouldn't take very long to get the idea in their heads. That is always a signal that something might take off. And then, of course, there's also, and I believe it's probably a little too early for this, but I'm a passionate believer that digital twins of ourselves will begin to populate the metaverse as well. Whoa. So in a way, the mental model of this is, as we increasingly, and the way in which Teams and Mesh will work will increasingly do this, if there is a manifestation of me, which I'm using for work in Teams meetings, which then can go virtual and inhabit three-dimensional spaces using Mesh, then I'm already beginning to build up a model. There is another me. Now, what if that other you could begin to look much more like you, or maybe like somebody else that you want it to look like, using Unreal Engine's MetaHuman Creator, which is showing us the way to how lifelike and realistic. We're beginning to get over the uncanny valley with things like that. What if all of that happens? Then you can begin to imagine digital twins of ourselves. And I really believe that will emerge over the next 5 to 10 years and be a major part of this.
It's incredibly cool. And I think we should also highlight that the biggest names in tech, such as Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, are all heavily rumoured, at least, to be working on AR headsets and glasses. Yeah. And you mentioned at the very beginning there about it being a long-term play. When all these big names in tech start working on the technology to bring it all to life, how long until adoption increases, do you think, and the metaverse enters the mainstream and we stop staring down at smartphones and looking at the world around us and like digital overlays and everything? How far away are we from that, do you think?
I have to say that opinion on this varies.
Yeah.
And I also don't trust my own opinion on it. As in, there are so many views on this. I don't think anybody really knows, because there are such strong variations in view. I think a lot depends on the speed at which AR tech begins to hit, and you just referenced that, begins to hit the marketplace. And that speed is not yet, that trajectory is not yet clear. Apple, are remaining extremely tight-lipped. Meta are clearly working on stuff. I think that all bets are off if somebody produces the equivalent of the iPod or the iPhone. And of course, it's worth remembering that one company produced both of those. And in both cases, everybody said, well, hang on, this isn't new. But they did it in such a way that it was a turning point. So I wouldn't take bets against Apple pulling off the same trick with this. But it might not be Apple, it might be somebody else. But I think that would be a game changer. I mean, if you do the thought experiment of next month, somebody produces something which is widely adopted as fast as the iPod or the iPhone was, and which has real utility, and where we rapidly begin to create more compelling and purposeful things than filling up beer glasses, then I think all things will move incredibly quickly at that stage. And certainly at Accenture, our view is things are going to move fast over the next few years. We're not prepared to wait and see how it develops. We are there developing it now, because we believe that what I called the guess at the beginning, that a number of things are coming together, is a good guess, and those things are coming together pretty fast. So I think you also have to look at the evolution of the web. I mean, 1995 was when it really began to break cover. But I don't think it was until the mid-2000s before a lot of companies realized we absolutely have to be there. So the speed at which this evolves will also depend on the speed of uptake of large organizations. It's clearly going to be invested in and driven heavily by big tech. One more kind of pointer I would add to this, which would tend to suggest sooner rather than later. So I think overall I'm trying to answer your question by saying sooner rather than later, but it is going to be a long evolution. The other pointer I was going to mention is a lot of our clients, which they did not have in the mid-2000s when the smartphone came along, and they definitely didn't have in the mid-1990s when the internet really burst cover, is they have digital departments and they have innovation departments. And those digital and innovation departments are, in many cases, already looking at the metaverse and beginning to experiment with it. So I think the speed at which our clients are responding to metaverse is out of all proportion to anything I've ever seen with any other technology shift.
It does feel like we're on the cusp of something incredibly special. And like we said at the very beginning, the last time we almost felt this was the unveiling of the iPhone in 2007, and then Android and Apple, the app stores in 2008, 9, and tablets and everything. And it feels like we're on the cusp of something special now. But for any business leaders that are listening, do you have any advice or tips on what they should be looking out for in the months ahead as those indicators of how things are ramping up?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be tracking closely the development of crypto.
Yeah,
it's a risky space in some ways, but for banks, for example, not being on top of understanding what's going there would look extremely foolish, because crypto will probably be at the heart of exchanges of value in the metaverse. And for a bank, you almost certainly want to be engaged in anything which is going to create new ways to exchange value. So I think if your specific businesses will have specific things they want to watch out for. If you're a real estate company, we are busy opening up infinite real estate. So what does that mean? So I think most businesses will have a core question they need to ask about the metaverse. If it's a bank, it's like, how do I get involved in exchange of value? If you're a real estate company, it's how do I own land in this space? Is that a thing that I can do? Should I do that? If you're a retailer, you may well be thinking, how does commerce work in the metaverse? That's probably your central question. So I think if you're, let me think of another example. If you're a business to business manufacturer, then how can I engage my customers better? For example, for service and maintenance in the metaverse might well be the central question. And then I think the next bit is experiment. So what we are recommending to our clients is, because this is still a highly ambiguous space and the guide ropes are not clear, now is the time to choose 1 to 3 areas and say, let's just dive in and begin to experiment with what this means and begin to play with the technology and understand, and with users, understand where this might go.
We've come full circle almost. We began with your origin story. So now I'm going to ask you if there was a song, piece of music, movie, book, or anything that has inspired or helped you in your career. Share that choice and a story behind it, and we'll leave the listeners on an inspirational note. How does that sound? No pressure.
That sounds fine. Well, because of the times we live in right now when we're recording this, this is not quite a direct answer to your question, but literally it's what's in my head now. I would go for Blowing in the Wind by Bob Dylan, or What's So Funny About Peace, Love and Understanding by Elvis Costello. I think those are songs worth listening to right now, given what's happening in Eastern Europe. I don't think that's quite what you were asking me, though, because you were talking about something that's inspired me in the past. And I've loved both those songs for years, but perhaps more relevant to this conversation, I was actually talking with a team this morning about exactly this, and I was using this as an example. I do love that moment in Big, the Tom Hanks movie, where he is a child who has magically inhabiting an adult's body. And he's working in a toy company. And the sort of business strategy exec, who has taken a big dislike to him, is busy presenting plans for a new toy. It's a new product development leader, basically. Yeah. And it's all based on research. And they've used the research basically to rifle in on, because the research is saying this, therefore we need to create this toy. And Tom Hanks, who's playing the innocent abroad, basically, because he's a boy in a man's body, sits there in this exec meeting and says, where's the fun in that? And I love that line, and I hold it very dear. So I think we should look at things, and we're doing this. This is exactly what I was talking about with the team literally an hour ago, is we should be looking at the things we're thinking of developing in the metaverse and looking at them with childlike eyes and just asking, where's the fun in that?
Oh, what a beautiful moment to end on. That's a great story. And before I let you go, Accenture is a big website, and I'm not sure the best place to point people to find stuff about the topics we've talked about today. But if anyone did, and also maybe want to contact your team, what's the best way of doing that?
If you go to our website and search Metaverse, you can also contact me over LinkedIn as well. I'd be happy to hear from people.
Awesome. I'll put a link to your LinkedIn on there as well. It's so much we covered today in a short amount of time about the metaverse, how we got here, where we're heading, but more than anything, that great choice to finish the show on there. A couple of great tunes and the story from Big. On the tunes front, I'd argue Masters of War by Bob Dylan might need to go in there too, but that's a story for another day. But thank you for joining me again.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.
Wow, such a cool topic, right? I mean, the democratization of access might lead to a wealth of shared cultural experiences and new economies, and I stand by that. But I think it's also important to remember that as brands seek to capitalize on the opportunities presented by the metaverse, ethics around their behavior and manipulation and sustainability and accessibility must all remain front of mind. It's something we often forget. We forgot in the past where every business wanted to create an app just for the sake of creating an app. So we don't want to make those same mistakes, but there is so much to be excited about. But over to you. What are you cautious about? What are you excited about when it comes to the metaverse and where we're heading? As always, email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. If you'd like to work with me, I can help with your CEO's thought leadership, blog articles, business blogs, and even help you launch your own podcast as well, where you just focus on speaking to great people on Microsoft Teams, Zoom, etc., and I will help you turn that into a podcast. And you will also find over 2,000 interviews there, not just from Tech Talks Daily, but also the other podcasts I've hosted with Citrix and Netgear too. But enough from me. I'll return again tomorrow, bright and early. But thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.